Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. It's a few minutes after the hour now. I've got 3 minutes past. So in appreciation for those of you who have joined so punctually, I think we'll get going. We are recording this session, so others will be able to catch up once they join or after the fact. But my name is Eileen Burbidge, and I'm the Executive Director here at Fertifa. Just stopped sharing my screen there. And sorry, for the last few minutes, you could also see Teams notifications because I was sharing the screen as well. My name is Eileen, as I was saying. I'm the Executive Director here at Fertifa. Fertifa is the most comprehensive benefits provider of reproductive, hormonal, and sexual health across Europe. And I'm really, really pleased to be joined today by Amanda Davie. I'll give Amanda a chance to introduce herself in just 1 minute. But before I do that, those of you who registered in advance may have been expecting Louise from ClearScore, which obviously we were all looking forward to, and I was really excited to host a conversation with her regarding myths and the menopause. But really regrettably, and with all of our sympathies from here on the Fertifa side, Louise had a sudden bereavement in the family and so was unable to join today. So we do look forward to having Louise in conversation, hopefully in coming weeks or in a couple of months' time. But I couldn't be more grateful to Amanda, who is somebody I seems to have known for years. And she had to remind me of that this morning when I asked if she might be available to stand in. So I will let Amanda introduce herself, and I might end up filling in some gaps because I know that Amanda is quite modest. And so I'll be sort of bigging her up even more, but explaining why we wanted to have a conversation with her today regarding these myths. But do you mind introducing yourself real quickly, Amanda, please?
Of course. Thank you, Eileen. Thank you for having me. Hello, everybody. And I also want to extend my condolences to Louise and her family. So I'm Amanda Davie. I am a people and culture leader and executive coach. So I work with organisations and leaders to help them to perform at their best and to help to create the environments for us all to thrive in the workplace. I started out in digital media in the dot-com boom, and I spent 20 years building digital media and tech businesses. And I was always incredibly passionate about people development. So whilst I wasn't, and I'm still not today, an HR professional, I have spent all of my career hiring and nurturing and retaining talent. I have a particular specialism in emotional intelligence coaching, and I also tend to find myself mostly coaching women and a lot of women in their midlife phase of their careers.
Thank you for that. And thanks again for joining us under such short notice. So as if that context that Amanda gave wasn't necessarily enough in terms of why we are excited to be speaking with her today, I also wanted to mention that, Amanda's done some great work with some great SMEs and companies throughout her career, even before she started coaching, and has experiences of colleagues as well as, I guess, personally, with respect to the menopause and also symptoms of that. So I'll try to draw from that as well. That's all right with Amanda. I'm sure she'll let me know if we go into areas that she doesn't want to talk about. But I think one thing that we definitely bonded over was, the importance of normalizing these conversations, and also Amanda being generous and willing to talk about her personal experiences to help sort of draw that out for others as well. So given all of that preamble and the introduction, a couple of things just to remind. I had already mentioned this early on, but this is being recorded. So we do hope to have a really interactive session. Amanda and I will look forward to catching up over coffee or other chances that we have between the two of us. So we don't just need this to be a one-to-one conversation. We're actually more keen to hear from all of you and appreciate those who already messaged in the group chat to say hello. We're really grateful for you lending your time. We want this to be valuable and useful for you in terms of, what we should cover, topics to discuss. And clearly we've got sort of a straw man or a sort of a framework that we can use, but we're happy to go wherever the conversation takes us. And so if people have preferences or other things that they'd rather talk about, please do let us know. Having said that, as you'll have seen, the title and the subject for the webinar is trying to break the myths about menopause. And we're going to go through what we think are 4 or 5 of the biggest myths that we have come across, certainly at Fertifo, when we support our clients and their employees through their journeys. We're also going to be talking about what Amanda's perceived as well. And I think just to open with the very, very first one, it is, we think, a myth that a lot of people, and too many people, probably think of menopause as being something that affects only older women or women of a certain age. And it's really a lot of our work at Fertifa to make sure that women who are suffering from early menopause or just simply might be starting it before they were ready or they were prepared to be thinking about it, that it's just as important there. We know, and I'm happy to share, the stat which most people may not know, which is symptoms of perimenopause can start between 7 to 12 years before a woman's last period. Clearly, that means then, given the average ages that women are when they have their last period, this can affect women as early as their late 30s, if not sooner, if they've had menopause as a consequence of PCOS or endometriosis or other types of issues. And so for us, this was probably the first myth we wanted to cover. And I just wanted to, put it to you, Amanda. I know we've talked about some things before. Is there anything that, you can lend on that topic, or, would you agree that this is a big myth that needs to be busted? It's probably a leading question. Or, what might you have to say about that?
Yeah, so I'm going to draw a bit on my own personal experience and indirect experience. So I first came across the menopause in the workplace in my early 30s. And at the time, I was one of only 2 women on an operational board. And the woman that sat opposite me, who came to become a very close friend, I was sat there dealing with fertility challenges, in fact, and going through multiple rounds of IVF. And opposite me sat my female colleague, who I came to realize was going through the early menopause in her early 30s. And at the time, she didn't feel like she could come out and tell anybody about that apart from me being the only other female. She certainly didn't feel that she could tell her male line manager. And so I think from my own personal experience, that came at quite a young age in my career, to realize there were women around me who were already facing early menopause. I didn't realized that I was going through perimenopause until just over 10 years later, in my mid-40s. And I think my experience was very common in that I had a line of inquiry as to why I had low moods, anxiety, I had the rage. I would have brain fog, memory loss, and increasingly was finding that life was just becoming really difficult. And this all happened at the beginning of the pandemic. So I, first of all, wanted to put a lot of my physical symptoms down to COVID. Maybe it's COVID. I think we were all going through that at that period in early 2020. I looked at whether I was suffering from depression because of the global pandemic. I started to lose my confidence, my self-esteem, and I put that down to whether that was the challenges of self-employment and losing a lot of work during the pandemic. Loss of libido, I put down to having young kids and letting my dog sleep in the bedroom with us. So there was always another reason why it wasn't perimenopause. And in fact, I just didn't think that perimenopause was something that would be happening to me in my early 40s. I thought it was something that women in their 50s went through. Certainly the menopause was something that women in their 50s went through. But having now coached as well a lot of women in their midlife, I realised that it's incredibly common for women to be experiencing symptoms in their early 40s, if not earlier.
And thanks for sharing all of that. Do you mind, or do you know even, you mentioned the colleague that was going through early, do you know what precipitated her early menopause? Do you think, was it endometriosis, PCOS? Was it, hereditary? We know that those whose mothers might have gone through early menopause are more likely to have early menopause themselves, just in case, others might be wondering or thinking about whether or not that could be affecting them.
So her immunity system was compromised. Her reproductive system was shutting down, but also she had suffered an incredible amount of trauma in her personal life, and I think, and so certainly she would say now that the physiological problems that she was experiencing went back to were trauma informed.
Okay, thanks for sharing that. And by the way, we do have a number of my Fertifa colleagues that are listening in on the webinar, of course, for support and such. And our medical director, Gideon, has corrected me. So PCOS can't cause early menopause. So I should correct that. Sorry. I was thinking endometriosis because I know that certain treatment for endometriosis might do, but I stand corrected on the PCOS. So thank you, Gideon. And then, so back to the sort of that myth or that misconception of women of a certain age. Is it, do you think, or is there more that do you think we should be doing to highlight that menopause can affect women, as early as late 30s, certainly early 40s? Do you feel that the conversation today, more broadly in society, helps to address that, or there's more that needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, this conversation today is incredibly important, and the title of it is bang on. That the menopause is one of many difficult conversations that we're not having enough of in the workplace. The menopause is one of many of life's challenges that impacts our performance at work, and therefore it is the responsibility of the employer and the organisation to help to lift those limits, to remove those barriers, or certainly to help individuals to find ways of thriving and returning to high performance. And obviously that then directly relates to the performance of the business. So it's not just down to the national press and media to educate us on women's health and the menopause. It's down to us as leaders and as employers as well.
No, I couldn't agree more. And so we're seeing comments. I don't know. I wonder if I can actually change so that people can comment to everyone, because I see comments coming in to hosts and panelists, but I don't know if they're being shared with everyone. And I probably need to try and adjust that setting. So I'll do that the next time you're chatting, Amanda. But there's even someone who's kindly made the comment that she doesn't think it helps, when GPs are discussing symptoms, because she's saying that she's had the experience that one can be considered, in speech marks, too young for it to be menopause related. And, we certainly see that even women in their late 40s or even early 50s are not accurately diagnosed with menopause, or they're, given incorrectly antidepressants for some of their symptoms, and menopause isn't considered enough early on. And so it must be obviously even worse for even younger women if, again, our medical practitioners aren't sort of fully, I guess, educated and informed about how early this can be. So my question and your response about, it's not just down to mass media, and it's not just all of us to talk about more in the workplace. We do need society and also the medical profession to talk about it more as well, in terms of how menopause can affect, women that I guess people haven't typically assumed would be affected by it, but not just 50 and older or the like. I'm also seeing, by the way, I had seen earlier that somebody had kindly raised their hand. Don't know if that was an accident. I've clearly had my share of fumbles with the mouse since this webinar has started. But if somebody had raised their hand earlier and has a question, please do ask it in the Q&A or put it in the chat, because we're happy to take that as we go. I will sort of go to one question that's been lodged in the Q&A right now. And the question, I'm not sure, so I might ask the person to follow up in the chat if they can, or in the Q&A, because their question is, why is menopause considered so different from other women's specific monthly events? And I guess they're trying to be polite, I'm not exactly sure, but I think they're saying, or they're asking why menopause is considered differently from, say, a menstrual cycle or a woman's menstrual period. Don't know if you'd interpret the question the same way, Amanda. I'll take a crack at giving my opinion on that, and then let you answer too, Amanda. But I think if I understand the question correctly, so please do put more in the Q&A if I'm getting this wrong. The question might be, why do we have to treat it differently, or why are we talking about it as a special thing when women already have monthly periods? So I think there's a couple things I'd say. First thing I would say is I don't think we speak about menstrual health enough as it is. So I don't think we talk about normal monthly events enough, because I think we have too many women who actually suffer in pain or with symptoms and are really aggrieved by their normal period. And we haven't acknowledged that or given them enough support as a society, certainly as a workplace and even a medical profession, because we have just for too long thought that women should just carry on with their monthly cycle. And so thank you, you're clarifying that I've inferred or understood or interpreted the question correctly. So my first point is, I think we should be talking about specific monthly events more often, and even normal or normally happening monthly periods much more. I do think we should be cognizant of them in the workplace. It's coming out, for example, in sport for athletes, and thinking about how high-performing athletes should think about their monthly cycles and should sort of tailor their training around that more. It's certainly the case that I think monthly cycles will affect women's well-being at work, and we should be mindful of that as well. Maybe to answer the question directly, though, why there's even more focus on menopause is because every woman experiences periods differently and has different menstrual health. Every woman will also experience menopause differently. Every woman will go through menopause, and the decrease in estrogen and progesterone, and in some cases testosterone, is so drastic in terms of what happens to a woman that it actually ends up being quite traumatic for a large number of women. And, you know, Amanda's talked about some of the symptoms she suffered. I myself also suffered symptoms, including heart palpitations, not just your classic sort of hot flushes, but had those as well. But there's also anxiety, there is depression, there can be lack of confidence, there can be sort of a difficulty in handling stress. And so being able to bring one's best self to work can become quite difficult with menopause. And it's probably true that this happens on a monthly basis as well, but because the average period is probably around 4 to 5 days, we probably kind of coast through them without really reflecting on whether there should be support or whether maybe there needs to be adjustments for that. Whereas for menopause, because those symptoms can last 7 to 12 years and is affecting women when they should be at peak productivity at work, it really does warrant, I think, extra conversation or extra attention. Is there anything you'd add to that, Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. We should be talking about periods. We should be talking about all health-related matters that impact on our performance, and that goes for men and women. I think if we take a couple of steps back and think about the workplace context here, you know, I've spent most of my career working in very male-dominated environments, the media industry, the technology industry. More recently, I did a year in a fintech business called Smart Pension. And you know, these are very male-dominated environments. And even with the best will, the conversation therefore is dominated. If the majority of the people on your team are male, then the conversation is going to be skewed towards what they want to talk about. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. So, we do need to bring these conversations up. And I think, the pandemic hasn't helped us really to be able to come together in a meaningful way and have conversations that really matter. A lot of conversations nowadays, especially with in hybrid working environments, end up being very transactional. They're about the here and now and the day to day and what we need to do to get stuff done. Whereas the cultural piece, the environments that we create, and especially those of us who are working within people teams or HR teams, this is the work that we do. We need to begin and continue the more difficult conversations that people are not necessarily having. So one thing that we did at Smart Pension, for example, was to launch a women's development programme, which meant that women could come together on a monthly basis and talk very intimately about their goals, their aspirations and their challenges. And whether it's your monthly period or the menopause, these are real challenges that we face. And women tend to suffer alone a lot. And again, in some environments are more patriarchal. And also, I think it's a very British mindset to keep calm, keep silent and carry on. And, I was reminded of that myself when I told my mum that I was going to trial HRT. And she went very quiet and very sullen with me and said she felt very disappointed in me because she didn't think I was one of those women. So I think, that we've still got people of my mum's age in the workplace, let's not forget. So this kind of historical, perhaps more patriarchal bias that we have, and again, it might be more British, that we shouldn't talk about these things and we shouldn't ask for help and we shouldn't seek medication. We should just keep calm and carry on. So we have to bring these conversations because they matter.
Gosh, thank you so much for sharing that. Obviously, I'm sorry I expressed it in my face. I couldn't hold back. I had my face actually covered on my screen because I had the Q&A and then I realized I probably, but I'm sorry that your mom had that reaction. I'm so pleased that you had the conversation with her, though. I think hopefully that helped you and that you understood that you're doing nothing wrong by looking after your well-being and taking advantage of resources and science and medicine that was available to you. So sending big love for that. You're also getting support in the chat. And I'm going to just come back to the chat real quick. Apologies, I'm interspersing our conversation, especially when we're getting into such personal stories as well, with some housekeeping. But as I previously mentioned, we're getting lots of lovely comments in the chat. Its default was that it was only available for Amanda and myself to see. I am going to change that to make the chat publicly available so that everyone who's attending can see what everyone else is saying, because I feel like that's probably what's intended. I do not know if that'll make the existing chat or what's already been posted available to everyone. For people who are wanting to post in the chat, please continue to do so. For those that want to be anonymous, please know that if you post in the chat, your name or the ID that you logged into Zoom will be visible in the chat. If you want to stay anonymous, please use the Q&A function. So 2 different ways to communicate with us. Sorry if I'm making it overly complicated, but I do feel like it's a nice thing for everyone to be able to chat with everyone else, or at least to see what everyone else is saying. So that has now been changed. So if you do type in the chat now, everyone else will see. If you have a question for us that you don't want it to be with your name or associated with your identity, please use the Q&A. To that end, I think that we've been we've had people using them interchangeably. So I did want to share with you, Amanda, people are sending you support and actually saying that their mom had the same reaction, for example. Other people are also sharing in both the Q&A and the chat to make the point that, you know, it's the reason, or I think this is an answer to why that question was lodged about this is an important conversation outside of even monthly periods. Somebody has contributed that, you know, relationship with colleagues is important to be mindful of, and it can be difficult to explain, for example, if a workplace or if people aren't already mindful about menopause. That's really important. And other people are basically also giving the same sort of reiteration about more awareness for perimenopause and menopause. And somebody else also offered their experience that when they went to the NHS and spoke to the GP there, and they had done blood tests to see whether or not their symptoms might be related to menopause, at the NHS, the doctors had said that the hormone levels were normal, so probably didn't think that. And yet when they went to a specialist, the specialist actually thought that they were certain markers that would designate perimenopause, but acknowledged that or suggested maybe not significant enough for the NHS. So there are distinctions there. Putting a question to the group so that now that everyone can message in the chat to everybody, somebody has asked if others that are attending the webinar have experience with anyone else's private medical insurance that might cover menopause. So please feel free to put that in the chat if you have experience with any PMI providers that will cover support for the menopause. I will offer that I understand that Bupa has some cover for menopause support, and I believe Aviva might as well, but I know that it's not sort of across the board, certainly not common. And so that just recaps a lot of messages that were in the chat before. People have been able to message everyone, and thank you. Esther's just mentioned Vitality also does a menopause support with Happy Health. Somebody else also reminding that I was right about the Bupa mention as well. And we also have another question. We'll get back to the other myths and misconceptions, I promise, but I really love having this dynamic conversation. So I hope, Amanda, you don't mind either. Somebody has asked in the Q&A, how is menopause diagnosed? They say that their GP prescribed HRT based on their symptoms, but they were never tested. And so I'll answer this by saying there are different, people will have different opinions, even different medical professionals will have different opinions. I will say that the Fertifa house view, and if Gideon's still listening, he'll correct me if I'm wrong, I'm sure, but the Fertifa house view is that women who are of the age of 45 or older don't necessarily need to be tested. And when we talk about testing, by the way, we're talking about blood testing of hormone levels. But at Fertifa, we believe that if you're 45 years or older, you don't need to have your bloods tested because you are inevitably, definitely going through perimenopause or menopause. And the only question is the severity or the degree of your symptoms. So because perimenopause is defined as the period before, sorry, I didn't mean that as a pun, the time before your last period ends or your period stops, you are most definitely going through that process if you're 45 and older, and you don't need blood work to say that clinically you're going through perimenopause. What is probably needed is a conversation about your symptoms and the best ways to manage those symptoms. If a woman is not yet 45 years old and suspects or feels they might have symptoms relating to perimenopause or menopause, then a blood test can certainly look at your hormone levels and therefore help establish whether or not that's more likely or not. And I'm getting thumbs ups from thumbs up, it's got to be from Gideon. So I haven't spoken too poorly there. Amanda, is there anything else you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I think just to add that, and I'm sure many of you know this already, the menopause is not part of formal GP or medicine training. So if you do a medicine degree, it's not covered off. If you do your GP training, it's not part of the curriculum. So GPs can request to do additional specialist training. So increasingly, most surgeries now will have at least one GP who is the menopause expert, who is menopause trained, and it's worth asking, to speak to that individual. But I I live in North London. I consider the area in which I live to be pretty progressive and the services to be fantastic. But even, my GP surgery, just last week, a friend of mine locally said that she went to speak to the female GP whom she was told was the menopause specialist, and this GP essentially dismissed her in a 10-minute conversation and told her that she probably was depressed and that she would prescribe antidepressants first, which I just find staggering, because this individual, my friend, doesn't have any history of poor mental health. And to get into that in a 10-minute conversation is incredibly problematic. So my own experience was that I didn't take no for an answer. I didn't get a good enough response the first time, so I sought a second opinion. Eileen and I have come to know each other more recently because we're part of a menopause support group. There's always groups of women, wherever that support comes from, who will talk to you about their experiences. And I think we have to gather the data, and we have to take a balanced view, and we have to take expert views, and that's why organisations like Fertifa are just so invaluable at the moment, because essentially they can put us in contact with the very best clinicians and experts in women's health. So my advice would be, until you get the answer and the information that you feel that you deserve, and by the way, you do absolutely deserve it, then keep going.
So well said. Thank you. And now I think, even though it's already half past, we'll get to at least the second myth and misconception that we were going to talk about. So the first one, again, just a reminder, is that being a myth that we've wanted to, or a misconception, was that a menopausal woman is always an older woman. And hopefully we've established clearly that is not the case. The second one, which we kind of already touched on, interestingly, because somebody helpfully asked this question, I just didn't want to segue to the second myth so quickly, was that the symptoms aren't that bad, or how bad can they be, or maybe they're not going to be that impactful. And that wasn't how the person who asked the question framed it, of course, and I'm sure that's not what they were suggesting. But I do think, again, in advance of, or before we've been able to have these conversations, before people are able to share their experiences, and before we're able to kind of break through previous generations of thinking, oh, didn't know you're that type of person if you're complaining or seeking help or seeking some kind of ways to manage your symptoms, that there's been this presumption that it can't be that bad, or at least one can just cope or manage their way through it, or should be able to just carry on. And so, yeah, Amanda, you were, I think, really gracious by suggesting maybe there's a bit of British culture in that, but we're certainly here to talk about how the symptoms are not only far-ranging and can be upwards of 30, if not more, symptoms, can be, we've already acknowledged, maybe too quickly dismissed as relating to something else. So a life event, a global pandemic, undue stress, lots of other things that we probably try and explain things away with it, but that they can be really, really deeply impactful. So, they can be the hot flashes, like has been covered, and I think most people would acknowledge is probably a widely known symptom of menopause, but there are so many others. So brain fog, forgetfulness, anxiety, depression. I myself suffered from heart palpitations. I also had what felt like dry skin or itchy skin, but my skin actually wasn't dry. It wasn't actually, if I would scratch my arm, it wasn't like I had sort of skin flaking off. It was just an itchiness I couldn't explain, which was really mind-boggling to me. I don't know if, Amanda, you've had other symptoms that you've also suffered or experienced, but as all of you can imagine, it makes carrying on like normal at work sometimes quite difficult, or at least challenging.
Yeah, and I think for me, I've had the aches and pains, I've had sore gums, I've had itchy skin, trying to perform in a high pressured environment, in a high powered job or just any job when you're sleep deprived. And we know that sleep, has formerly been a form of torture in some societies, and all the parents of young children here will know exactly how that feels. So the symptoms are far reaching, and I think there's lots of great initiatives in the workplace around mental health. It's Mental Health Awareness Week this week. I'm sure there might be conversations being had around that, but just nurturing an environment where we're asking and in training our line managers to ask how their colleagues, how their people are feeling, getting people to be able to have permission to express themselves emotionally, to be able to describe how they're feeling, both psychologically and physiologically, is the way forwards for workplaces.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think maybe I should have acknowledged this at the outset of this particular myth or misconception. I mean, clearly there will be women who don't suffer, from severe symptoms. I've spoken to women, who genuinely sort of thought, it didn't even occur to me. I've had my last period. I haven't had one for 3 years, so it must mean that I went through perimenopause without getting any of the symptoms. And how did that happen? Or is it going to come later or something like this? And so, or anything in between. There might be people who have an occasional hot flush or just have 1 or 2 symptoms just for a few months time, and then it's completely fine. So we're also not suggesting it's going to be particularly devastating for anyone necessarily. What we're wanting to sort of bust the myth on in this case is simply the fact that if people think that everyone will just sail through and that it isn't that bad because of one person or you've heard about somebody who didn't have a difficult time, that would be the same for anybody else. So that was the point of that second myth. By the way, before I move on to the third myth, I've noticed we've got people who have raised their hands, which I absolutely love. I'm here for all day. What I am not sure yet, and again, sorry if this is just my fumbling around as I've done in this Zoom webinar, let me know if you are wanting to speak and you want the mic, or if you are wanting to ask a question in the Q&A, which is anonymous, or if you want to put it in the chat, which can be anonymous and just to Amanda and myself, or can be to everyone. But happy, of course, to engage more people and to keep the conversation going if others have more to say. We do have people that continue to share with us. Some have just shared with you and me, Amanda, about the GP training, for example. So thank you for flagging that, because somebody is sharing that when they sought help 10 years ago, their GP tested for so many other things before sort of finally admitting that perhaps the only option left was perimenopause and then referred them on. But then this same GP practice has now hired somebody who's further trained in menopause, which apparently is been a game changer for them, and I'm sure for the other patients that attend. So that's brilliant. Again, before we go on to the third myth, somebody else has posted or lodged a point in the Q&A, just to share with everybody else as well, that they've discovered that their symptoms also change from month to month. So since we were just talking about this myth that the symptoms aren't that bad, absolutely right. And thank you for calling this out. They're also not necessarily consistent. It's not just that if somebody has hot flushes, they might have hot flushes for the whole time and maybe that's it, or that it's even going to be the heart palpitations or the anxiety or what it might be. This person's kindly sharing that what's been recent and surprising to them is dry eyes, which again, we often look to excuse this by other things, and they thought it could have been dust or hay fever, and also recurrent urinary tract infections. And this person is offering their experience because they're saying it took them ages to link the symptoms to menopause, and actually then to work to persuade their GP. But yes, they've now understood that that's probably related to their menopause, and I would agree. We know that that is both of those, dry eyes and also UTIs or frequent UTIs can be symptoms of the menopause as well. So thank you for sharing that and pointing that out, that it can change. And of course, for something that lasts 7 to 12 years, potentially, yeah, it's not always going to be the same thing each and every month. Indeed, absolutely right. So just looking at other things that people are mentioning. So I see that somebody has actually shared this with everyone, so I don't need to read that out, but about, managers sharing some of the experiences that they have, people going through it. So thank you for that. contribution as well. So now going back to the list that we had sort of started out with, and I mentioned at the top of the webinar that we had 4 or 5 myths we'd go through. We're on to number 3, the third myth. And just to recap, first one was that a menopausal person is always going to be an older woman. Second myth was that the symptoms aren't that bad. And now the third one is that talking about menopause is awkward or difficult or uncomfortable. And I mean, Amanda's experience of even talking about it with her mom, I think, shows that it doesn't have to be. And again, I love that Amanda took that head on and you know, didn't have a sort of a different reaction when her mom had her reaction, but it doesn't have to be awkward at all. You know, for me, certainly, you know, I think that it's been important. I realize how much I've learned now that I'm on HRT, now that I've gone through, you know, all the endless Googling, all the endless conversations, the support group that Amanda mentioned that we're both in thanks to WhatsApp, which I found through Nextdoor. Now that I've gone through all that, much as Amanda said earlier, I'm really happy to sort of share what I've learned to help anybody else that might be starting their journey or that process themselves, if it can save them any amount of time or self-doubt. And so I certainly don't find conversation awkward or difficult at all, having, you know, already started my journey. If one is about to start that journey or just starting to think about it and thinks it might be awkward, please know, like Amanda said, pretty much every person who's been through it is really happy to talk about their experiences, what I've found. So I don't know if there's anything else you want to add to that, Amanda.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is that I make every effort to normalize it in my work and the conversations that I have in the workplace. So, for example, if I am chairing or hosting a meeting or a group or team coaching session, one of the housekeeping points I make is, you know, is everyone feeling comfortable? Is the room temperature okay for everybody? And I will, if it's in person and I'm there, I will say, you know, for example, I'm going through perimenopause. So if I start to have a hot flush, I might turn the aircon up. And I deliberately say that, especially when there's men in the meeting, because I'm normalizing it. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying that I need to adjust the room temperature to accommodate my needs. So there's lots of little ways in which we can interject as leaders, as facilitators, as line managers, or meeting hosts. And the other thing I wanted to say was, in Smart Pension, off the back of the women's program, we Smart use Slack for group online conversations, and we had a women's support group Slack channel, and we also had a menopause support Slack channel. And the menopause support group was smaller but was far more talkative than the women's group, which had a larger and more diverse group of women, in not least younger women who, you know, it's not even on their radar yet. Those that are going through this absolutely do want to talk about it, because we recognise the need for empathy and sympathy and support, and to be able to give support to one another. So there's nothing awkward whatsoever about talking about the menopause.
Thank you for that. Obviously, I couldn't agree more. So I feel like I'm probably a broken record at this point. But again, it also helps to explain why we're so grateful for you coming onto this webinar to talk about it with us as well. But somebody has asked a question in the Q&A, and I didn't want to ignore it. Because Amanda and I have made reference to how we have recently been reacquainted in this WhatsApp support group that we're in, somebody's asked for details of that. It is a WhatsApp group. I don't know that actually this is probably the best place to share that with. I did find it on Nextdoor. If people want to get in touch or leave your contact details, we're happy to follow up afterwards, and I'm happy to share that with you privately. I think that's probably most appropriate for whatever it's worth. It was set up by the organizer as a North London specific sort of menopause support group, because I think one of the things that we've talked about in that group is, you know, the HRT shortages, for example, and which chemists were stocking certain things. And so it was specific to that local area. And I'm sure that there will be others that are pertinent to wherever you might be. But if you want to get in touch with us or leave your details, after the fact, please do that. And I'm happy to follow up, and we can send you pointers to all sorts of resources, because that's not the only place. Hopefully you would also have maybe an employee network at your workplace. If you haven't, maybe request one or suggest to start one at your workplace. Certainly at Fertifa, we're happy to have conversations. Our patient advisors, that's what we're here to do, is to provide support to people in their workplaces. But we're happy to signpost you to all sorts of other groups as well. So do let us know. Somebody else has asked a question, which I think is a great question. And I wasn't going to say elephant in the room, but it's I think it's like probably the key question for people who are thinking about menopause in the workplace. And so I'm just going to read hers out loud, which is, she's saying from her experience, she finds it tough enough being in speech marks, an older woman in the workplace anyway. And Amanda, you mentioned workplaces you've been in, which are largely younger men. But even if that's not the case at an SME, say, or even at a corporate, if there's more men or younger people, this person says that she feels if she was to start discussing menopause at work with her boss or colleagues, she thinks it would be career suicide. And she asks, how do you think it can be brought up without reflecting poorly on her or her abilities or her commitments, or her productivity? And I'd love your views on that, Amanda, since so much of what you do is support women through this very question.
Yeah, well, firstly, I want to say to this lady that I feel for you. That's it's incredibly tough to be surviving in that environment, and I use that word surviving deliberately. These are not environments where we can thrive, and so yeah, I totally get it, and I've had colleagues that have felt the same, didn't feel like they could talk openly about the menopause, that it would, that some form of judgment would be made about their capacity or their potential to perform. What I would say is to, follow the trust, speak to whoever, whether that's inside the workplace or outside, the people who you trust, to get the support that you need. And that might be, advice giving, or it might just be, lending an ear and just giving you the sense of, being heard that you need. I think, this comes back to the responsibility of people specialists, of HR specialists, and of leaders to cultivate an environment where people can talk about anything, frankly. We don't need to be in environments where we feel that the only alternative we have, or the only options we have, are to stay silent, or to go for it, take risks, take high personal risk, and talk about it anyway. Whether there's a fear of recrimination there, or whether you might be asked to apologize for that afterwards. We're, at the end of the day, we're all adults, and 51% of us are female, and the vast majority of those females will go through the menopause and find it incredibly challenging. It's no coincidence that we're losing more women of menopause age from the workplace than any other demographic in the workplace. So, if we want to have diverse and inclusive environments, then we have to help those who are struggling with the menopause. And we also have to educate everybody, our male colleagues included, so that the conversation is normalised.
Thank you for that, Amanda. So actually, you just touched on one other myth that we were going to talk through, and I've realized the time, so I've rambled on too much, clearly, and wish we could have heard more from you, so I should shut up. But one of the other myths was that this is a conversation only for women. And, you helped sort of us to prioritize this when we were chatting sort of before the webinar started, which is, just as you said, this isn't just for women who will go through menopause, it is for men as well. And we've been talking about the workplace context and setting, and comments have been made about managers, line managers, teamwork, collaboration, and the like, but also colleagues and partners, siblings, relatives, every person is born of a woman. So every person, whether they're going to go through menopause or not, will know somebody who has gone through it, will go through it, or is going through it now, and should be more cognizant about the symptoms and everything else, and also maybe what adjustments should be made or how to support people going through menopause. So that would be a fourth myth. I'm now talking much faster. I'm going straight through to two more myths because I do think there are two more to mention. One was that for a workplace, having a policy in place kind of ticks the box, or that's what a workplace should do to support women going through the menopause. And I think that it's important, while we might not have time to go into some of the finer details, to say that, or suggest that that's not enough. That's a great starting point, I'd suggest. And I think the thought that goes into developing a policy for a workplace will really, really help. But I also think that that will kind of uncover and really, really lead to conversations about what additional support is actually needed and how those conversations can be had. And also to that person who asked that question, how people can feel safe and protected talking about what they might be going through without fear of recrimination. So that's, I would say, the fifth myth. And then sixth one is again, gratefully received by somebody who's posted it in the chat. And it's that HRT is going to be the answer for everyone. And I think that's also a really, really fair myth or misconception for us to acknowledge here while everyone's still on, which is that, while I've found HRT to be really helpful for me, sounds like Amanda's found it helpful for her as well. Clearly, there are other ways to manage symptoms. And so we're not suggesting that one size fits all. It's just like we said, symptoms won't be the same for everyone. The experience won't be the same for everyone, but clearly the way to treat symptoms won't be the same for everyone as well. So I wanted to at least sort of get through the myths that we had prepared to talk about with Amanda here, and then what was also offered by all of you, the attendees. So thank you for that. Going back now to some questions. Somebody was asking whether people tend to suffer symptoms continuously, i.e. throughout the month, or do they happen sort of in and around periods? Yes, because of similar sort of other hormone afflictions or symptoms. I don't know if you wanted to answer based on your experience, Amanda, or if you want me to take a crack first.
So I'm on the Mirena coil, so I don't bleed. And so I don't exactly know when the time of the month is, or indeed whether I don't think I have reached the menopause yet. I've still got way too many symptoms. So I think they're heightened during that time of the month for a lot of women.
Yeah, I think that's true as well. So I'm not on the coil, so I do still have my cycles, although they're getting less and less regular or more irregular. So it is, I actually started to try and track different symptoms, but I've always stopped because within a month I have so many, like I'll sort of note, oh, I had trouble sleeping last night, or I, ended up with a little bit more anxiety than I thought I would have had normally, or I had a heart palpitation. And I'm realizing that there is no consistency for me anyway. So it's not like, oh, this lasts for 2 days, a week before my period starts every month or anything like that. I find that they can come up and down. And I've often wished I knew if it was directly correlated to a hormone level, but my understanding is that hormone levels, you don't sort of feel that instantaneous. It's not quite the same as, say, blood sugar. So you don't feel it quite like that. But for me, I haven't found it to just be right before a cycle, for example, or during a cycle. I have found different symptoms throughout the whole month. So that's been fun. I say with sarcasm, but, and somebody else has asked the question about whether or not the recording can be shared later with their line managers or HR teams. And yes, of course, we'd encourage, and I hope Amanda wouldn't mind either, let's, spread it as widely as you can. I think the whole point of the conversation today was to try and, again, help affect change about normalizing the conversation, about breaking some of these myths, about trying to dispel the misconceptions. And we only talked through 5 or 6 of them. There's a long, long list, unfortunately, but it starts with, the fact that there aren't enough conversations about the topic and that more people should be aware of them. So please do feel free to share with your line managers. And I just am mindful that there are 3 more minutes left before the hour. People might have other calls or meetings they have to get to. But Amanda, I want to make sure that I get the chance to thank you again, because this really was quite a last minute imposition on my part to ask you to fill in for, unfortunately, what happened to Louise. But it's been amazing to have you. I really appreciate it. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add or that you didn't feel you got to say because maybe the way the conversation went.
No, the only thing that I wanted to add is that I'm co-founder of a global professional development community for women called She Has No Limits, and we can be found on Guild, which is a professional networking community app. So there are lots of conversations about the menopause there, thankfully, and indeed about all career challenges and goals, and it's a really supportive environment. So you can find me there and lots of other support as well. But thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
No, thank you. Thank you again. And thanks so much to everyone who joined. I actually wasn't paying as much attention to sort of the participant number as I probably should have done, but I did see it at one point close to 100. So we really appreciate everyone tuning in, taking time out of their day to join us. Really grateful for all of the comments, the Q&A, and also all of the sort of offers of suggestions for other myths. There are clearly a long list of them. So we could have multiple webinars on this. We look forward to having another one in the near future, and hopefully having Amanda back to talk about these things and more topics next time. So thank you all for joining. Really appreciate it. And thank you again, Amanda. Take care. Have a good rest of your day.